Greetings and welcome to the online middle school classroom. Today we're talking about essay writing in the middle school. We're hoping to have a comprehensive guide as to how to create an essay in the middle school that's of a great quality, and we're taking through steps one by one. So of course, as you can see, episode 1 is called Writing an Introduction, and this of course is the first and most important part of an essay because it really tells us whereabouts we're going to go. So let's check it out. Now, before I get into the nit and grit of how to actually make an essay, it's really important to start that, of course, we're looking at the introduction here. But an introduction can only come when you actually know what you're going to write about. And I really want to stress this fact that, I had a student once who put up their hand and said, "Oh, help me." They were a year 10 student and they were in a history class. Of course, they put their hand up asking for some help. I said, "What's wrong?" And they said, I don't know what to do with my essay. How am I going to finish this? It's too hard." I said, It's all right. Look, this is a World War II essay. We can do this. Now, what do you know about World War II? Their response, I believe, was nothing. That was the first sign that there was a problem. And really, I suppose I'm telling you this to start off because, if you don't know what you're going to be writing about, you're going to have a lot of trouble writing an essay. And even though that seems fairly simple, a lot of people seem to make that mistake. So, look, if you don't know the content of what you're going to be writing about or what's going to be happening, please make sure you find out before you continue on the next section of this video. But if you know what you're going to be writing about, that is fantastic. And of course, you can jump right along. So what we'll find is writing a really good essay introduction has 3 major steps, which I'm going to be talking through in this video. Now, the first step is to give a broad introduction to the focus of the essay. And this can be really different depending on the type of essay that you're writing. For example, if you were writing an essay that was analysing a book, well, that broad focus might be novels. Or if you were writing about the environment and the problem of smog and pollution on the environment, then the environment in general might be your broad introduction. It depends on the topic, but let's look through a couple of examples. So for this example, we're looking at a persuasive essay, and the topic that I have to write about is that chewing gum should be banned. And this is a fairly common one that I use in my classes as an example. Now, in this case, if I'm trying to think about the really big picture or the general focus here, I'm not talking about whether or not it should be banned, but the essay itself is about chewing gum. So the first thing I'm going to look at is this concept of chewing gum, and I'm going to start fairly simply just by saying chewing gum. Now, that seems fairly simple, but let's see a more complicated version. Now, for example 2, I'm looking at a novel analysis essay, and in this case the topic I've chosen is what is the major theme of Tomorrow When the War Began. For people who don't know, Tomorrow When the War Began is actually the name of a book, and it's a fairly common teenage fiction which most schools have probably been stocked. And back in my day, it was a real, you have to read this book. But if you don't know it, insert random title of the book that you happen to be writing an essay about right now. What I'm really looking to point out is how you would start this first rule. And you'll remember the first rule is that you want to give a broad introduction to the focus of the essay. Now, obviously, Tomorrow When the War Began is the book that we're looking at in this case, but because it's a novel analysis, I'm actually going to start a bit broader with this particular introduction. And the thing I'm going to pick at is going to be novels. So you can see that broad focus of the essay can change depending on what the topic is, but for the sake of discussion, I've come back to example 1, which was my persuasive essay, and I'm going to go back to example 2 as well for this first part so that you can kind of understand how it's adaptable. Now, I've mentioned the fact that a good essay always starts with a general, broad introduction to the focus. So in this particular case, I've said that chewing gum is the focus of this essay. So when we look at some examples of broad statements, you might notice that all of them are pretty general, which means that they can't really be argued with. You'll notice that a lot of them are pretty vague, and it's really about getting people to think about that focus topic more than getting someone to argue with you. You're not looking to cause a fight on your first sentence of your essay. We'll deal with that later. But in this case, we're looking to get people interested in what we're writing. So starting off with a broad statement is a really important thing. So we're back to our first example here, and I want to make a broad statement about the focus of the essay. And of course, I've already shown that the focus is chewing gum. So what I'm going to do, and this is actually something that I teach my Year 8 and my Year 9 students to start with, and you can do this, this still qualifies. It's not brilliant, it's not Shakespeare, but in terms of what we're talking about, this certainly works. Chewing gum, in this case, is a big deal. Now you might think that that sounds a little bit too simple, and in a lot of ways it is, and you might have a teacher that says, oh, I don't know about that sounds a bit too casual, and of course they'd be right, but in terms of starting and looking at the structure of a good introduction, this is just something that I always talk to my students about in terms of really trying to develop that broad introduction. Now, anyone would know that there would be better ways that you could say this. And one example would be to say something like, chewing gum is a controversial product. So let's write that one down. In this case, I'm really doing the same thing. It sounds a lot better, but it's still a broad statement about the focus of the essay. So anything you can come up with in this area is certainly going to work in terms of facilitating that structure. And really, I think structure is the most important thing of a good essay in the middle school. We're back to example 2, where we were looking at this novel analysis about tomorrow when the war began. And of course, I've got this word novel here, which I identified as the focus, because even though, of course, it's about tomorrow when the war began, the novels is the broad focus. So same deal, I could very easily say novels are a big deal. And once again, that would certainly qualify as a broad statement. But similar to before, I'm going to try and be a little bit fancier, and things that come to my mind are things like novels have a way of communicating messages. Novels are a great source of inspiration. Novels contain a number of different elements which communicate with a reader. All of these spoken examples are things that you could definitely use as examples of a broad statement to open up the focus of your essay. But in this case, I'm going to start by saying novels have a way of communicating meaning through text. Alright, so in this case, my broad introduction is novels have a way of communicating meaning through text. I haven't gone too specific about what I'm going to talk about in this essay. I haven't gone too specific in terms of creating any controversy, but I've given a good, clear understanding that this next essay is going to be about a novel, and that's a really important thing. So with the first step of our introduction out of the way, which was to give a broad introduction to the focus of the essay, we can now start to look at the second stage, and it's the second out of 3 stages, and here what we're looking to do is to highlight the subject and or topic of the essay. Now that might sound a little bit fancy, but what it really means is that this is the section where we actually make the reader aware of what the essay is going to be about. So now we're looking at our opening line, which was our broad introduction to the focus of the essay. Chewing gum is a controversial product. Now what I want to do is specify the guts of the actual topic and where it's going to go in the discussion of this essay. So you might remember that the topic was that chewing gum should be banned, and that's what I really need to put into this introduction now. I need to make it known that I don't like chewing gum and I think it should be banned. That's not anything personal against chewing gum, it's just me following the direction of the essay. So what I'm really doing here is I'm rewording the topic of the essay in my own words. In this case, chewing gum should be banned. Now obviously chewing gum in my discussion is going to be quite a negative thing. So I'm going to hint to that in terms of what I'm going to actually mention for my essay. So in this case, I'm going to write something fairly simple. I'm going to say it causes negative problems and therefore should be banned. There we go. Second stage complete. All I've really done is highlighted what the topic of the essay is in my own words, and I've really made it part of my introduction so that it flows together. You'll notice that I use the word it here instead of saying chewing gum again, and in that case I'm using a pronoun, which means that it's less repetitive, and that's a really important thing as well when we're looking to polish our essay. But we won't worry about that at the moment. At the moment we've got a good, clear introduction which tells us what we're going to be talking about. It tells us that we're against chewing gum, and it tells us that we think that it should be banned, and that's what we're going to be arguing. If I do the same thing for our second example, where we were talking about novels, in this case, novels have a way of communicating meaning through text. When I'm looking to highlight the subject and or topic of the essay, I actually need to do two things here. I need to actually introduce the subject, which in this case is the book, Tomorrow When the War Began, and then I have to talk about the topic, which is to do with what the major theme is. So in this case, I'm going to start by introducing the book. So of course, that's a fairly simple thing to do. I'm just going to write in what the title of the book is, and when I think about it now, I probably should have picked a title that was a little bit shorter because it means that I'm writing more, but that's okay, you can put up with that I suppose. So Tomorrow When the War Began by John Marsden, and just while I'm writing this down, I should mention if you haven't read the book, I made a movie of it which was pretty good, but the book is just a classic. And I really encourage you to check it out. It would make a great essay if you were looking to do it just for fun, or if you had an independent reading project. So in this case, Tomorrow When the War Began by John Marsden is what I've written down. So I've introduced the book, and this is my first reference. But of course, if the whole essay is going to be about this book, I really need to get that title in fairly quickly. Otherwise, I'm just going off topic. So now that I've got the subject of the essay in, which is Tomorrow When the War Began, I need to now communicate the topic. And you might remember again, the topic of this essay is what is the major theme of Tomorrow When the War Began. So I need to say something about the major theme. So I'm going to make it again fairly simple. And I'm going to say Tomorrow When the War Began by John Marsden communicates a central theme. I could have easily said major theme, but when you get an opportunity, it's great just to mix up your language a little bit. So I'm not doing anything fancy here, but what I've done is I've introduced the subject, and I've introduced the fact that I'm going to be talking about this central theme. And again, that's the focus of the essay, so it's really important that I make that clear. Now that I've done the first and second sections of my essay introduction, I can move on to the third and final stage, which you can see is that I need to tell the reader what the essay will discuss and in what order. Now, it's really important with an essay that it doesn't read like a mystery novel, more it reads like a clear and well communicated piece of writing, and the reader should always know what's coming next. So the next plan is to really make it clear to the reader what I'm going to talk about. I don't want them to have any surprises. I want them to feel like they're going along the journey with me. Let's see how we go. So I'm back to my first example about a persuasive essay on the topic of chewing gum should be banned. And so far I've done the first and second steps. Chewing gum is a controversial product, it causes negative problems and therefore should be banned. Now I should mention that while I'm writing this essay, I've already got a plan about what my paragraphs are going to be about. And if you haven't done this, it might be a really good opportunity to just stop and think about that. In this particular essay, I'm going to do 2 paragraphs. So my first paragraph, P1, is going to be about the effect of chewing gum on the environment. So I'm going to just write that on the side here, just so we can remember that. And that's going to make sense a little bit more when I do this third stage. And of course, for my second paragraph, another reason I think that we should really ban chewing gum is for its effect on social habits. I'm thinking about those people that chew really loud or spit it on the ground, and the fact it's really just a bit gross. So these are my 2 paragraphs, and it's important to know what these are because you really need to show this in your introduction. So as I mentioned, the third step is to tell the reader what your essay will discuss and in what order. Well, I've shown over here that first, I'm going to talk about the negative effect on the environment, and then I'm going to talk about the negative effect on social habits. Now, I don't have to give away everything I'm going to talk about. Just telling us what the actual overview, what the category of discussion is going to be enough for my reader. So, there's a couple of steps here that are really important. Now, the first part of this third section is a really controversial section because you'll find that some teachers absolutely hate it, and it's probably a good thing that they do because what it means is they're trying to push you not to be too obvious. But because we're thinking about a middle school essay, I'm going to make this really quite clear and quite nuts and bolts. So even though you might get told off for this in later stages, and there are ways around it, I just want you to think about this for your first introduction. What I'm going to start by saying is obviously I want to highlight what this essay is going to discuss. So I'm going to use 3 dreaded words that some teachers absolutely hate. And those words are in this essay. Now, there's nothing wrong with these 3 words, but one of the reasons, particularly in senior school, teachers don't like them is because they'll say it's too obvious and you need to be more clear and more concise. And they'll also say things like, if someone's reading your essay, they obviously know that it is an essay, so you don't need to tell us that. It's similar to the reason that we don't say I when we're writing with formal language, but that's another discussion altogether. For the sake of this introduction, however, I'm going to let this language slide in the hope that you, who can at least write a well-structured introduction, can figure out a way to maybe clean up this language later on. Like I said though, it's still a functional and clearly structured introduction, and I think in middle school, that's the most important thing. Let's move on. I've said in this essay, okay, and I'm trying to show what we're going to discuss. So again, I'm going to make it nice and obvious. In this essay, we will discuss. Okay, so I've made it clear that this is what is going to come from the discussion of my essay. In this essay, we will discuss. And this is where I'm going to actually refer back to on the side here, where I've put what's going to be in each paragraph. In paragraph 1, I've said environment, so it's really important that I'm going to list that first. And paragraph 2, I've said social habits. But I also need to link it all together. So watch what I do. In this essay, we will discuss how chewing gum can be harmful to, and now I'm going to talk about the specific things I'm going to focus on in this essay. So the first one I identified was environment. So I'm going to say the environment and the second one is social habits. Now, if I had a third paragraph here, that would be fine. I could just say the environment, comma, social habits, comma, and whatever that third paragraph was. But because there's only 2 paragraphs here, it's okay that I've just set it out like this. Alright, so I've got my completed introduction sitting in front of me, and now you can see that I've used all 3 steps, and it flows together quite nicely. Chewing gum is a controversial product. It causes negative products and therefore should be banned. In this essay, we will discuss how chewing gum can be harmful to the environment and social habits. So the only mistake I made, and you might have picked up on this, for which I apologise, is that I forgot to put gun in there. Like I said, it's clear, it's structured, and it gives the reader a really good impression about what's going to be coming in the essay. When I come back to the novel essay, I'm going to do the exact same thing. But once again, I need to think about what each paragraph is going to be about. Now, for this particular topic, I have to look at what is the major theme of Tomorrow When the War Began. Now, finding themes in a text can be a really difficult thing as it is. And Tomorrow When the War Began has so much depth to it. Firstly, you could probably guess it's about war, it's about fighting, it's about life and the value of life, it's about security. So there's this whole bunch of stuff that I could talk about. But in this case, I think the theme that I might look at, and like I said, this could be one of a million different themes, but I'm going to look at security because I know that the characters of the young people in that book are constantly trying to feel secure, and that's why they're moving around a lot. So in this case, the theme that I'm looking at is security, and I need to make that really clear in my introduction. As well as that, I need to think about what I'm going to be doing for each of my paragraphs. Now, if security is my theme, what I'm really looking to do is to prove that theme in terms of how it's a part of of the book. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on my first paragraph by focusing on the characters. So it's going to be the characters of the book, and I'm going to talk about them and how they show this sense of security. And in paragraph 2, I'm going to look at the plot line and how the plot line really brings in this idea of security. Now, once again, this might not necessarily be a perfect approach, but in my case, I'm not writing the full essay, I'm just showing you this introduction. Let me show you how it all comes back together. Once again, I go through that first stage where I'm going to say, in this essay. And just like before, I'm going to say, we will discuss. Okay, like I said, it might be frowned on language, but at least it's clear, and clarity and structure are really important. So in this essay, we will discuss how the theme of security, and I'm not hitting you with any hardballs here, I'm just looking up at what I've written at the top. The theme of security is shown through the use, okay, and I know it probably seems like I'm stretching a little bit here in terms of trying to get it all to fit, but that's all fine. Here we've shown how the theme of security is shown through the use of, and it's the same thing I did before. I'm going to say characters first because that's my first paragraph. Characters. And once again, if I had a third paragraph, I would say comma, and then I might say plot, and then I might say something else. But in this case, I'm just going to say plot. And I've got this awful habit when I'm writing on the board for these videos that I tend to accidentally put capital letters sometimes when I'm thinking about things like that, but it really doesn't need one. Okay, so in this essay, we will discuss how the theme of security is shown through the use of characters and plot. Now, once again, I can pretty up that language a little bit, but at the moment, it's clear, it's functional, and it's well structured. And most importantly, the reader knows what's going to be coming next. And that's what we really need to see, particularly in a middle school essay. So here we've shown a little bit about how you could start writing an essay in the middle school. If you've been confused about anything or you're unsure about any of those 3 steps, please leave a message at the bottom of this video and we'll make a real effort to get back to you. Hopefully this has given you a few tips on how you can get yourself started, and stay tuned for future videos about how you can write your first paragraphs and your conclusion.